institutions he attacks in fact function and conduct themselves. On the one hand, he claims the right to make these allegations as if they were conclusive statements of fact in a public forum. On the other, he seems to admit that he hasn't got the tools to find out the true facts and is only asking questions. It is very clear, however, that he is not only asking questions. The sting attached to the questions is such that they appear as statements of fact. This is precisely how he wishes them to be read in the media, which in turn, as he always intended, have aptly met his expectations. These public statements are a direct attack on the integrity and propriety of the other applicants and of myself, and go to the root of our positions. They seriously endanger the relationship of trust and confidence so necessary in our professional lives, which we have spent so much effort and time in establishing. I would like to refer merely to one example, to the headline and the front page article of the Star of the 22nd of March 2019, stating, I quote, "Holomisa drops PIC bombshell. UDM leader lifts the lead on dodgy fund dealings," close quotes. The article proceeds to reproduce in detail all the allegations and speculations put by Mr. Holomisa in its evidence before the Commission. His motives are obviously ulterior. We all know an election is coming in almost less than a month's time. But hey, there seems little purpose in speculating further what these may be. The lack of any hard factual material, notwithstanding the length and breadth of the unrelenting conjecture, invective indulged by Mr. Holomisa, makes it very difficult to know quite how to set the record straight. There is nothing of substance to which one really can respond specifically, save to give the correct history of events and to indicate as clearly as possible how we conduct ourselves and what our environment entails. Having been, since 1994, the MEC for Finance and Economic Affairs in the province of Gauteng, and in 2004, I was appointed the Deputy Minister of Finance by President Mbeki. In that capacity, as I have said, I became the ex-officio chairman of the PIC and the non-executive director thereof. I remained in that position until the 25th of September 2008, when I resigned following the recall of President Mbeki.
Can I just ask why you use the term ex officio? Weren't you actually the chairman, and that's it?
It's my chairmanship was by extension of being the PIC, of being the Deputy Minister of Finance. I think it describes, as much as possible, that relationship, that it was not like other directors who sat with me, who were nominated independently. And normally what happens is that it is the function and the duty of the directors to elect amongst themselves the chairperson of a board. And hence, somehow, this is a shorthand to describe that peculiar relationship.
Which really is, by virtue of the fact that I was deputy minister, I became the chairperson of the PIC.
I'll take that. So, thank you very much. Towards the end of, I'm on paragraph 22, towards the end of 2004, President Mbeki articulated a vision of the private sector playing a key role together with government by investing in the future development of infrastructure on the African continent. At this point, I would like to refer to Exhibit 3, page 7. It's a document that was referred to in Mr. Mahlwele's evidence, page 7, which is the introductory paragraph. I'd like just to read, which is paragraph 2. It reads as follows. As a result of the challenges facing infrastructure development in Africa, His Excellency, President Thabo Mbeki, observed that a study of 9 civil service pension funds on the continent revealed that they collectively held more than 120 billion US dollars, leading him to remark, I quote, "If we were to agree amongst ourselves to set up an African infrastructure fund, a possibility exists for us to start taking our fate as Africans in our own hands. This will give us the possibility to use our resources, perhaps with leverage from the African and international private sector, to deal, at least in part, with our developmental challenges," close quote. This is part of the document that was motivating the setting up of PAIDF. It is a document of the 11th of November 2005. This was in line with his ideal of an African Renaissance, as I understood it. The fundamental aim was ultimately to make Africa self-sufficient, raise it out of debt, inter alia, by creating its own capital and generating its own wealth. This became one of the guiding principles and ideals which I was tasked with implementing.
Can I ask a
Sure.
question there? Thank you. When you say you were tasked with implementing in the ideal, who tasked you? Because clearly this is a vision of the president, and from the evidence heard from Mr. Mahlwele last week, a number of the African pension funds did not come to the party. It was an ideal. So if we looked at this, was it who tasked this, and was it in writing?
No. Thank you, Commissioner, for that question. It was not in writing, as Mr. Mahlwele answered on Tuesday, but quite obviously the PIC had clearly undertaken within itself and also explained with a number of documents the approvals from the different ministers that clearly indicates it was a task at hand. And as a chairperson of the PIC with the PIC, quite obviously that task also fell on my shoulders.
And the discussions, as you refer to the memo on page 7 with the GEPF, were they fully supportive, and did they give that mandate to you in writing?
Come again?
The PIC, you've indicated as the PIC you took this on board.
Yes.
But it is the GEPF mandate that you execute in many ways.
Sure.
So your memo of this on page 7 that you referred to a few minutes ago was a memo to yourselves, from yourselves to the GEPF.
Sure.
GEPF, as I understood it, chose to invest directly.
Absolutely.
And therefore the role of the PIC in relation to that as a mandate, if the GEP invested directly in this fund, whose funds did you invest in as the PIC to deal with the vision? So there was no written instruction, it was the interpretation of government to implement the vision of the president at the time. And therefore, in that capacity as the PIC, the relationship with the GEPF, which invested directly in PIDF 1 and 2, and what role did the PIC and its mandate play in that investment, if any?
Okay. Can I separate in dealing with that question? There are two sets of questions, areas that I would like to highlight. The first one is that we cannot, at any point, take away the whole vision and the initiative from the PIC. I think that's one. The PIC was the initiator, was a pioneer in pioneering this view. The second aspect was that, as explained by Mr. Mahlwele on Tuesday, was that initially it was thought that the funds will come through Isibaya. That was the initial thought. But the GPF thought differently, because they're the custodians of the savings of the pensioners, that in this instance, we are going to invest directly. But of importance is that the objective was achieved.
I want to stay with that a second, because a vision of that nature as articulated by the President at that time is one thing. The PIC mandate is surely to ensure the best returns to the GEPF pension fund.
Absolutely.
And therefore, an interpretation of this nature, as you've just articulated it, could be in conflict with that. It need not be, but it could be.
Well,
if you're interpreting,
if
you're interpreting a vision of the President to say we must implement that, if the I'm not saying that this occurred, but if the President, his vision, as we've seen subsequently, is very different, you interpret it and say, well, that's the vision of the President, yes or no, and you don't just go and do it. The question has to be a balance between the vision and the returns.
No, absolutely, because at the end of the day, I think the mandate of the PIC and any pension fund for that matter is to a large extent to ensure that at any point the pensioners are not disadvantaged, that to protect their savings. And I think that is sacrosanct.
That they are in fact advantaged.
Pardon?
That they are in fact advantaged. That's the
yes, absolutely. You know, that's one thing. You know, but the second aspect, the issue around infrastructure being an asset class, it's a matter that has been debated in a number of forums internationally. It is a type of an asset class that guarantees not the types of return that shoots out the lights, but that saves the capital and brings on board reasonable returns. And infrastructure, unlike when you talk about the issues of equities, you know, it's seen as part and parcel of some of the safer investment opportunities, particularly that draws within it, because it's long-term, pension funds, because pension funds have patient capital. But the returns, we're not gambling with the returns. We knew what the returns are, and Mr. Mahlole dealt with the issues of returns. It is a safe asset class.
I would say that's questionable.
Okay.
I think that is something that is very debatable, especially when it is innovative and so on. So it's a question of the balance of risk to the pension fund, and the question of opportunity or the opportunity of returns that you might forfeit of a different level. So it is a debatable question. I would not say it's a guaranteed fund, that because it's infrastructure, it's safe. I would not agree with that. But be that as it may, it's your motivation, and just for the purposes of this hearing, it is to understand the motivation.
Okay.
I just wanted to be sure that this was an interpretation by the PIC. There was no written instruction.
There was no written instruction. Sure. Now, where were we?
Mr. Moriketi, can I ask you a question before you go on? Are you able to explain in what circumstances the GEPF could take a decision independently, as it did in relation to PAIDF 1 and 2, by investing its money directly, and in other circumstances it was the PIC that decided what to do with the GEPF money? So how was that balance struck between the GEPF deciding independently and at times the PIC making the decisions?
I'll give the following explanation. It might not be adequate, because during the times of us raising PAIDF 1, the PIC did not have an Africa mandate. But the GPF was the custodian of the savings, and hence it could take that decision without changing, at that point, the PIC's mandate. And I think that's one thing. Later on, it
just on that point,
sure.
Therefore, can I ask whether that was the GEPF decision to invest at that point in time was a result of a discussion about that very question between the PIC and the GEPF?
I wasn't, I don't want to speculate on it. I would say I don't know because I wasn't part and parcel of the executives that engaged the GPF when it comes to that. But I would assume that could have been one of the areas that was explored. Going forward, I think the GPF, as the custodian, has a right, because the PIC is an asset manager of choice, but not restricting the GPF, and it has been a discussion in a number of bulletins, from deciding on other managers of choice. And I think it's an area, probably in future, that will be explored.
Can I stay with that a second? Because it's a very important question, given that the GEPF is a defined benefit fund.
Yes.
That if it was, as the GEPF, to determine a range of investment or investing entities other than the PIC, could and would this have implications for the shareholder in terms of oversight and its obligation as the fallback position of fulfilling any gap, should there be one in the fund?
If I understand your question, Commissioner, is that if the GPF moved out of the current mandate of the PIC being the sole asset manager,
Yeah,
and
not
invested
necessarily
in
moving everything out, but having a mix of investment of asset managers.
it's a possibility, because one of the things is that also, when you look at the investment of GPF funds or capital, it's also invested in a number of other asset managers, be it Alan Gray's of this world and all that. Already as we speak, through the PIC, of course, already as we speak, they are managing that. But the PIC ultimately is the one that is finally accountable to the GPF in terms of the mandate that defines the returns and the mandate that defines allocation, concentration, risk, you name it. They're dealing with one service provider. If they had to deal with a multiplicity of service providers, that would have other implications in as far as the GPF is concerned. One of which would be that they must increase their capacity to be able to manage the multiplicity of these, service providers. That's one. Secondly, because the GPF also has a mandate around transformation, it means they had to give certain indicators to ensure that the service providers comply with all the transformation imperatives of the Republic of South Africa. So it's going to increase the complexity. It's doable, I must say, but it increases the complexity.
But it would also have significant implications for the PIC. I mean, if you just take the question of the chairpersonship, as you've indicated, the Deputy Minister of Finance has, through practice since '94, for different reasons, I would say, but has been the chair, precisely because the shareholder is, the minister acts as shareholder representative for that. So it would have serious or significant implications for the PIC should the GEPF choose to do that.
Yeah. Theoretically, yes, I think you're quite right, Commissioner. Theoretically, it would have, but already the discussions, probably, that will also be informed by the work of this commission, is going to talk to the whole issue of governance. What is the most appropriate governance structure going forward that the PIC must have? There's been already a number of discussions, there's been a number of papers that were written on it, but I agree with you, that will definitely have implications.
Mr. Moleketi, at the time of the GPF decision to invest in PAIDF 1 and PAIDF 2, my understanding is that the chairperson of the GPF was Dr. Martin Couscous. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Do you know where he is at the moment?
Well, we are in touch. He's in the private sector. He's an entrepreneur. Currently, he's an entrepreneur, and I think he's doing well. I saw him about a month ago.
Chairperson, perhaps if he is available, he might be a person who can answer some of the questions that Commissioner Marcus has raised.
I'm sure Advocate Libbe has taken note of that.
Thank you. Mr. Moleketi, would you continue, please?
I'm on paragraph 24, is it?
I think you're
23.
23. Yeah.
23. This became one of the guiding principles and ideals which I was tasked to implement. The Public Investment Corporation Act number 23 of 2004 was passed with the aim of expanding, modernizing the PIC's mandate and to better enable it to invest the funds and promote the fortunes of those whose interests it was meant to serve. The board of directors of the PIC was constituted under the Act and consisted chiefly of chartered accountants. Mr. Tsepo Don Mahlwele, one of the applicants referred to above, was the head of corporate finance and the Isibaya Fund at the PIC, reporting to the then CEO of the PIC, Mr. Brian Mulifi.
Sorry, can I just go back a second to your last sentence of paragraph 23, which is that it was constituted chiefly by chartered accountants. Is that a good or a bad thing? I mean, why would you choose, this is investment skill. I mean, chartered accountants is your balance sheet and your numbers, and does the left-hand column equal the right-hand column, and so on and so forth. An investment fund requires perhaps a slightly different skill in addition. It's not excluding chartered accountants, but we've seen from other corporates that a board full of chartered accountants does not necessarily see the wood for the trees. Why would you emphasize chartered accountants as the board?
It was a matter of emphasis. If there are 6 of you on the board and 4 of you are chartered accountants.
Is that good or bad is what I'm asking.
But
surely somebody should understand the markets.
The boards, the constitution of different boards, I sit on different boards. It's one of the things that is required, particularly through King 4, is the need for diversity. Because people bring different skills on the board, you know. It can't just be people from a particular discipline that are dominant in the board.
That's why I'm asking the question.
A bit of diversity, you know, a bit of diversity. I have nothing against chartered accountants, they're good friends of mine, but I think you can do with other skills being on the board.
Raising this in a serious sense, not just flippantly, because the question of the skill of a board in relation to an investment entity or a company like the PIC that deals with the complexity of investments. And part of our terms of reference is the governance and the competencies that are required for an effective board. So I was asking here that it consisted chiefly of chartered accountants. I'm raising with you the question of, was that the most appropriate way to do it? And your response is you actually need greater diversity. Yeah,
because you know, one other thing, just to elaborate on what I mean.
Yeah, just before you do.
Yeah.
I mean, was this constitution of the Board of Chartered Accountants and the Board of Chartered Accountants be a deliberate decision to bring in accountants, or did it just turn out that way? How did this happen?
I think it was a deliberate decision because these are appointed by the Minister of Finance, you know. But one of the things, just to elaborate on the point, is that you have people who have investment finance skills, which might be much more appropriate around when you talk about investments, you know. It's not just CAs, but there are other people with financial skills that are quite diverse, you know. You have people with skills of primarily trained around portfolio management, you know. And I'm saying it's a balance, it's that type of balance. If I were to recommend now, I would say in the PIC, you also need people with, to a large extent, investment financial skills, you know, not just CAs, you know. But you do find CAs that are CAs and also they have investment financial skills, you know, so it's yeah. So it's that type of, you know, it shouldn't be like someone is CA, therefore, you know, it's that's what I'm trying to say.
Just to add is that the board has changed dramatically, I mean, since then.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And it has brought other there's more diversity now than it was, okay, yeah, sure.
When you were chairperson of, sorry, when you were chairperson of the board, the other directors, were they all appointed by the Minister of Finance?
Yes, indeed, they were, sure. They're all, well, yeah, it's a process, appointed and approved through cabinet, you know, because there is normally a cabinet minute that indicates the appointments in different state-owned entities. But the memorandum comes through the Minister of Finance to cabinet.
Since we are there, the fact that the chair or chairperson of the PIC is the Deputy Minister of Finance, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I'll be in trouble, you know, this is like between
You were
the
there.
rock and the hard place.
Just give us your honest opinion.
There were times, I think it's a point that was made by Commissioner Marcus, that because ultimately, this is a defined benefit, ultimately, the Treasury, the national fiscus, is the custodian in the event that there is a shortfall, you know? And hence, the involvement of the Deputy Minister of Finance to ensure that at least there's someone who's looking out for that, you know? But at this point we have evolved, we have a whole range of skills in South Africa. We have people who not only have skills, but they have experience in the management of assets, in the management of the scale of assets that the PIC is having. And I would say it can't just be confined to a Deputy Minister of Finance. I would rather have a situation where there's an open mind when it comes to this matter, because I don't think there's any limitation of any skilled person who is not a public representative being capable of leading the PIC. In short, I've tried to answer you. I tried to hedge my bet a little bit, but I think I'm tilting towards having someone who is not the Deputy Minister of Finance.
That's understandable, Mr. Mdleketi. Thank you.
Paragraph 25.
Yeah. The PIC's Management Executive Committee identified Mr. Mahluele as the best person qualified to set up a fund known as the Pan-African Infrastructure Development Fund, PAIDF, which was intended to be the primary vehicle envisaged in the ideal of President Mbeki. Mr. Mahluele therefore resigned from his employment with the PIC in April 2006 in order to take up this task.
Sorry, can we just stay there a minute?
Sure.
The implication of this paragraph is that there was no process to do a search or inquiry into the broader knowledge around South Africa of who could actually chair this or head this up. You take somebody from within the organization, identified by the executive, to appoint them to take this role. Is that due process? Would that be standard in terms of, and you're the chair at that point in time, given the importance of this and where it's actually led to in terms of the processes here, would this be something that you would today say is appropriate? I'm not talking about the individual, I'm talking about the process, that there's no assessment of who in fact should take that up, and you lose one of your skilled people heading a key element in the PIC to go and do something else without any query about, can we look and see who's the best fit, who is broadly available from throughout? Is it just a question that you decreed that?
Okay.
And did it come to the board for approval, you as chairperson of the board?
Okay. I will, in answering this question, probably I'll walk on the same path that Mr. Mahluele walked, you know.
I thought as chair you might have a different one.
No. I'll add my own, you know, I'll walk on that same path because I think there's consistency. You know, the truth, you can't turn it this way and that way, you know. It remains the truth, you know. But I'll start by referring to page 21 of Exhibit 3, paragraph 57 and 58. Page 21, is it? So, did I say 51? Page 21, yeah. I think that this is the page that Mr. Mashwele started by referring to. That indicates the process. But it says, for the purpose, paragraph 57 of the exhibit, for the purpose of establishing the reporting lines between now and up until the first closure of the fund, a steering committee consisting of the following individuals has been appointed. And that steering committee included Brian Molefe, who was the CEO of the PIC at the time, Charles Okalam, a Nigerian, I'll come back to that, Paul Gomez, Director World Bank from Guinea-Bissau, and Professor Wiseman Gulu. At this point, as explained by Mr. Mashwele, is that this fund was going to be set up primarily as a partnership to launch it between ourselves and Nigeria. I'd like just to give flavor to this initiative, to reflect on a meeting which was convened by Minister of Finance Trevor Manuel on the sidelines of the World Bank IMF meeting in the fall, I think, of 2006. If I'm not mistaken, it could have been 2007, but 2005, but I think it was 2006. In that meeting, he convened a meeting between himself and the Minister of Finance of Nigeria under President Obasanjo. At that time, the Minister of Finance was Ms. Ngozi. And in that meeting, he was trying basically to bridge the gap between ourselves and the Nigerians, to broker a deal. In that meeting, on his side, we had a delegation that comprised of Mr. Mashwele, Brian Molefe, and I, on the South African side. On the Nigerian side, it was Minister Ngozi. I think Charles was there, and a number of her officials. And it is after that meeting that we took a decision that in South Africa, for this thing to happen, we must go it alone. Because he could not bridge that gap. He could not broker a deal between ourselves and the Nigerian partners. The details of that, I think, will make an interesting coffee break conversations. But safe to say, it was basically that situation. And we walked out of that and we said, we're going to do it, and we'll do it as South Africa, with all other partners that will come and join us in that endeavor. That is a context that led to the fact that Mr. Mashwele, who at that time was also part of the secretariat of the trust, that a decision was, here is somebody amongst ourselves who has been involved in the genesis of this fund, who has been involved in the difficult negotiations, including the one that I've just referred to. This, to me, even as I sit here now, and I'm glad we took that decision, was the best decision that we could take.
Mr. Moleketi, can I ask you a question, going back to paragraph 25?
Yes.
Paragraph 25 deals with the identification of Mr. Mashwele as the best person qualified to set up the PAIDF. That was when he was still at the PIC and before he resigned, and then subsequent to that established the Facilitation Trust. Did you play any role in the selection of Mr. Mashwele as the best person qualified?
Like it's clearly indicated in my statement that it was the executive management, and correctly so, because they understood the individual skills, through you, Chair, the individual skills of the different people within the PIC. Mr. Mashwele on Tuesday indicated the type of experience that he had, you know, and I think it is on the basis of that was identified. And also Isibaya. No, I was not involved, just to answer the question, you know. I was not involved in that decision, but if that decision had the support of the board of the PIC.
Were you a member of the Management Executive Committee?
No, I wasn't. I was a non-executive director.
And you say you played no role in the identification of Mr.
Mashwele, no.
Do you know what process was followed by the Management Executive Committee in coming to identify Mr. Mashwele?
I wouldn't know. I don't know.
I'm sorry?
I don't know. You know, probably it's either Mr. Mashwele or the PIC will be able to reflect on that history, which is about 12 years or so.
Paragraph 26.
The decision to set up the PIDF and the manner in which this was done was dealt with in more detail by Mr. Mashwele in his evidence before this commission on Tuesday last week. In brief, just to recap, with all the necessary legal approvals and in compliance with the requirements of the PFMA, a loan of seed capital in the sum of 17 million was made by the PIC to the PIDF Facilitation Trust as to permit Mr. Mashwele to set up the fund and to attract the private sector investment. And I think I would like to refer to Exhibit 3, once again, page 67 to 69, that indicates the approval of the Minister of Finance then, Minister Trevor Manuel, of this facility. The seed capital was provided. The seed capital was provided by way of an arm's length loan, which was repayable in full, plus interest to the PIC. The amount drawn down on the loan, with certain costs and expenses, was in total just over 22.5 million rands. In order to attract private sector investments in the PIDF, the fund had to be, and had to be seen to be, entirely independent of government control. With this, I'd like to refer to Exhibit 3, pages 93 to 95. This was the letter which was written on the 29th of May, 2008, from the chairperson, from the chairman of PAIDF to myself as the chairman of HFM, which clearly states the requirement and the need for that independence. And I think the matter also was dealt with when Mr. Mashwele delivered his evidence. This was for a number of reasons on which Mr. Mashwele had expanded in his evidence, as I indicated to this commission, but chiefly that the private sector investment generally carries a greater risk factor, hence a greater return on investment. That investment were to be sought across the continent and not limited to South Africa, and most importantly, that PAIDF was intended to be entirely free of any form of political control or manipulation, a factor which always deters those private sector investment whom Mr. Mashwele would need to attract. As chairman of the PIC, I did not sit on the management ESCO, was therefore not party to the decision to make the loan of seed capital available. The seed capital loan, plus accrued interest, was repaid within 2 years of receipt thereof. In order to manage the funds invested by the private sector investors in PAIDF, it was necessary to establish a company. In anticipation thereof, And as explained in full by Mr. Matluele on Tuesday last week, a shelf company had been acquired by Mr. Matluele, with the PIC being the nominal sole shareholder for the time being. Mr. Matluele explained in full detail that for various reasons, the investors in PAIDF wanted an equity stake in the management company, and therefore the right as shareholders to appoint directors to its board. This was so that they could themselves determine the progress of the management company and the manner in which their funds were to be dealt with. This was later implemented, and the same prerogative extended to the PIC since it had provided the seed capital loan, and as the initiator of the concept, it obviously had a material interest in the overall success of PAIDF. The management company was renamed HFM, Herith Fund Managers. In accordance with the above decision, the shareholding of Herith Fund Managers were as follows: PIC 46%, Old Mutual Life Assurance Limited 12%, ABSA Trading Investment Solution Pty Ltd 12%, the Herith Share Incentive Scheme Trust 30%. This trust permitted the employees of HFM to participate indirectly in an equity share of the company, thereby incentivizing them over and above their salary entitlements. It is a precondition in the industry that the highly skilled employees who are necessary to administer and to manage the funds under their control be offered such an equity share.
Sorry, just to follow that, I mean, this is a 30% stake for roughly, what, 29 people, if I remember correctly?
Yes, I think the evidence of Mr. Matluele counted
Yeah,
29 people.
that came to
Sure.
29.
Sure.
What would an
Chair,
average...
Chair, it's not the 29. I think the 29 is HHET, which is Exhibit 7B.
Okay,
And now we're talking about HSIST, which is Exhibit 7A.
and how many people in HSIs?
I think it's less than 29.
Okay, but the
16.
question, 16.
16.
So the
Okay.
question is of a scheme this, of an investment of this size, a 30% stake for 16 people in the total is rather significant for those individuals. Would that be, what would a normal incentive scheme, what would an average incentive scheme for the staff involved of that sort of number, 15, whether it's 16 or 30, for a scheme of this size, an investment of this size, what would an average or incentive scheme comprise of a total? Would it be 30%, 50% for those involved, especially given the nature of this investment, where you've got a 46% for the PIC as a whole, a 12% for Old Mutual and its investment, and then 16 people have 30%. So almost 3 times the size return for those 16 people than to the Old Mutual investment of the same investment. What's the proportion? I mean, this looks very disproportionate to me in terms of the potential earning.
Just on that, Commissioner, it might look so, but the fact is the 16 people are responsible for all the work and mandated by the investors to grow their investments, to ensure that all the processes are followed. These are the workhorses.
But that applies in any activity that those people are involved. I'm asking about the proportionality
I'm coming
to that.
I'm coming to that, you know. I'm coming to that. That the significance of executives in a private equity environment is quite critical. It is critical so that you ensure that you have people who would stay the term of 15 years, because this is a 15-year fund, and you must incentivize them appropriately so that there is something in it for them. Because it's a long wait before you get rewarded. It's not like you're rewarded at the end of a financial year. You have to take and be on the side of the investors, to have your own skin in the game to make this a success. And I think it's important once we understand it like that. Then the issues of proportionalities. These will differ from fund to fund. There are funds where people have even more than 30%. But I don't want to argue the issues of proportionalities, because I think it's a matter that is debatable, that is open to interpretation, depending on where you sit.
Mr. Moleketi, the question was generally in the private equity environment, not specifically in this case, but generally in a private equity environment, what is the usual stake of management in the equity of a management company?
When you say generally, I'm involved in very limited ones. I would rather say, at this point, I don't want to hazard a guess.
I think that's fair enough, but the question for me that I would really want to stress here is that the proportionality of 16 people as individuals in investing in a government employee pension fund money, and the return to them is greater than the return of the other investors. You've got two investors of...
No, not quite.
It's not a return on investment,
Not quite.
Chair. It's not a return on investment. This is the
I understand that.
stake of the management company.
I understand that. But the return to those individuals, I mean, you know, come on. This is government employee pension fund, and the management of that has a 16%, a 30% stake in the return.
It's not a return.
Can I add something?
Chairperson, can I say, probably, you know, we'll need to go back, think about that, and come up with an answer. But as I sit here, I don't think it is excessive, because as explained, the investors also, to a large extent, they have their returns. And I think it's important for us to understand, for us to argue what is this 30%, before somebody starts thinking that it's 30% of the entire returns of the fund. And I think, can I request that we go back and address that specific question?
I think that would be very helpful, so that there's clarity on what the 30% is in relation to the investments of 12%, 12%, and 46%.
Sure.
Can I add something here? I could be wrong, but when you look at the currently, is that the bulk of the private equity funds, close to 100%, is owned by the staff. You know, so the management company is different to the fund itself. You know, so even this 30%, this could be the past, but currently is that 100% actually is owned by the employees. So just as a general thing is that management companies of private equity funds are owned by staff. The investors don't participate in the shareholding of the management companies, broadly. As far as I know, I could be wrong, but that's how it is.
Tell me, at the time that the decision relating to these issues in paragraph 32 were made, were you already part of HFM?
Yes, yeah, sure. As I indicated, I was chairman up until 2012. I'm on 32.4. Yes. We're talking about the 30%. This trust permitted employees of HFM to participate indirectly in an equity share of the company, thereby incentivizing them over and above their salary entitlements. It is a precondition in the industry that the highly skilled employees who are necessary to administer and manage the fund under their control be offered such an equity share. These employees, however, receive no equity benefit unless and until the clients for whom they are managing and investing funds have been fully paid out. I am not a beneficiary of the Harris Share Incentive Scheme Trust. I am not a beneficiary.
Just to interrupt you there.
Yeah. All right. Yeah.
Sorry, Commissioner Lady. That is also
I think
apparent.
Continue, and I'll
I just want to make a point that what Mr. Moleketi has just said about him not being a beneficiary of the HSIST, that is also evident from Exhibit 7A. I apologize for the interruption.
Sure.
Mr. Muleketi,
Yes.
just to check something, General Pantulomisa said you are a beneficiary to various companies. Where are you a beneficiary of? I mean, where in this whole group of Harriet, Lebashe, is there some place where you are a beneficiary?
Yeah. No. I've stated that I'm the shareholder in Lebashe through my family trust.
And directors' fees and scheme shares, options across the board?
I don't have. The only thing that I received from Harris General Partners is board fees. I have no options. That's the only thing that I receive. As far as Lebashe is concerned, like any shareholder, I receive any benefit that accrues to shareholders.
And if I can ask, what's your shareholding in Lebashe, if I can ask?
I
it's
think
not
with
something,
respect, that's beyond the scope of this.
you don't want to talk about it,
Yes.
okay? No, it's
It is
fine, it's
private.
fine. Yeah, it's fine, I wanted to know. Yeah, it's fine, it's fine.
But can I just
But
correct?
if
can-
Mr. Blakely wants to answer that, he can answer it.
No, I think I'm appropriately advised and agree with counsel.
Can I just correct one thing? You said you only receive board fees from Harith GP,
Yes.
but in your statement you say you also receive board fees from Harith
FM.
FM after you resigned as Deputy Minister of Finance and as
Absolutely
Chair
correct, yes.
of the PIC.
Sure. Because whilst I was a public office bearer, it is not allowed, I think Commissioner Marcus would also back this up, that you should receive any form of income from any other source, except probably if you have a savings account and you get interest.
Just one point of clarity then, just in terms of 332.4 again, these employees receive no equity benefit unless and until the clients for whom they are managing and investing funds have been fully paid out. That at this point in time, there has been no benefit
No.
accrued to any member of HSI.
No, there hasn't been any benefit. Yeah.
Commissioner Marcus, if I could just refer you to Mr. Matlwele's statement. You'll recall from his evidence last week that this whole issue was dealt with in paragraph 20 on page 7 of his statement.
I know that very well, but I'm talking to Mr. Moleketi right now.
Yes, but he wasn't involved in this. This is... Yes, I accept that. I accept that.
That's another question. Are you in HGP? Are you part of the carry trust, the carry portions by any chance?
No, I am not. I am not part of a carry of any form in HGP.
Okay, all right.
I know that in other situations, but I hope that Mr. Matlwele is listening, chairmen and directors are also roped into the carry in other private equity. But in this one, so that I don't cause any confusion, I am not part of the carry.
May I continue?
Yeah. Mr. Matlwele, I'm on paragraph 31.
No, you at
No,
33.
33.
Yes.
While the PIC had 46% stake in the management company, HFM, the decision of the GPF to invest in PAIDF, both PAIDF 1 and PAIDF 2, as shall be seen, was one that was taken entirely and independently of the PIC. I think what is important is it's a point that Mr. Matlwele dealt with in his statement, and it's something that we explored also earlier on in terms of the directly investing in PIDF 1 and PIDF 2 by the GPF.
Mr. Moleketi, I don't want to sound semantic, but if you say it was taken entirely independently of the PIC, when we looked at it earlier, the PIC did not have the mandate for PAIDF 1. And it was speculated that there was discussion between the PIC and the GPF.
Sure.
So it cannot be taken entirely independently.
Okay, let me explain that. In the GPF, they have independent governance structures. The idea might have originated from within the PIC, but I think the trustees and the governance structure applied their minds, and independent of whoever proposed the idea arrived at a decision. This is what I meant by it.
I think it could be slightly better phrased in that context. I accept what
Sure.
you're saying, but just saying entirely independently assumes that there had been no discussion with that, and I think that that would not be absolutely accurate. But that they sat and took the decision as the GPF, yes.
And that it wasn't a decision of the PIC.
Yeah.
In other words, I understand the point that you're making is that in a sense the PIC took a back seat. And Commissioner Marcus, you were suggesting that there must have been some discussion, but it wasn't a discussion to which Mr. Moleketi was party.
I accept that, but all I'm raising here is that given that context, to say entirely independently is not quite the same as saying the board sat and evaluated and took a decision.
Sure.
It's just a little bit of ambiguity in that statement.
Yeah, I think we can put it, I accept, Commissioner, we can put it more eloquently and clearly that it was an independent decision of the Board of Trustees of the GPF, having consulted, having been made aware of the idea from the PIC, that they took the decision independently. Sure. The PIC's exposure was therefore limited to its seed capital loan. Furthermore, although it had no risk or exposure as regards to the investments of the PIDF, the PIC acquired a significant benefit by virtue of its 46% stake in HFM. The benefits accruing to the shareholders of HFM, including the PIC, were dealt with by Mr. Mahluele in his evidence. The total benefit to the PIC in this regard was, as at May 2018, in the sum of almost 96 million. This also was dealt with in the evidence of Mr. Mahluele. It is to be stressed that this benefit accrued to it without its having any risk regarding its own funds, because there were no PIC funds invested. It was solely as a result of its shareholding in HFM. Mr. Holomisa, sure.
Mr. Moleketi, I've been advised that it's time for the customary adjournment at 11. I don't know if the Commission wishes to take a break now, or should Mr. Moleketi continue?
We would be prepared to go on until 11:30, but if any of you would like a break now, that's fine, we'll take it.
No, I'm not requesting one. I was just given a signal.
Let's go on until 11:30.
Mr. Moleketi, are you able to then continue?
Yes, I am, sure. Mr. Holomisa, I'm on paragraph 34. Mr. Holomisa's shallow conjecture, therefore, that the HFM is engaged in investing the funds of the PIC and therefore exposing the livelihood of innocent civil service pensioners to unnecessary and dangerous risk is therefore demonstrably false. In fact, the PIC greatly benefits from its shareholding of HFM. By virtue of my chairpersonship of the PIC, I together with other non-executive directors of the PIC were appointed as the PIC's nominees to the board and as non-executives of HFM. In that capacity, I was then elected as the chairman of the board of HFM. At no stage, whilst I was in public office, did I receive any remuneration for my role on the board of HFM. I think that's a matter that we dealt with earlier. Given his expertise in the establishment of PAIDF and his overall qualification, Mr. Mahlwele became a director and was employed as the CEO of HFM.
Sorry, just for clarity, who created or determined the employment of Mr. Mahlwele in that 37?
Who?
It says Mr. Mahlwele became a director and was employed as CEO of HFM. Who determined that? How was that decided? By whom?
I think probably my memory fails me, but I recall that there is a contract, an employment contract of Mr. Mahlwele in this, it's either it's in the PAC or in a different PAC.
It's page 74 that you're looking for.
So it was Harith
Wait,
Fund
no, no, no.
Managers
Yeah, no,
that
no, which-
employed him.
Yes, and you can see it signed by the chairman of Harith Fund Managers, the contract.
That's at page 90.
Yes. In
So
fact,
this-
terms of employment starts from page 73. And the contract is initialed.
So
and
it was
signed.
signed by yourself
Yes, as the chair.
as the chair of Harith,
Yes,
as an employment contract with Mr. Mahlwele.
yes.
Taken, again, just referring back to the original discussion or question that I asked, there was no public or other process about identifying somebody. This was a person who had been involved in the process and
Absolutely.
became a person that you, as the chair of Harith, felt was appropriate to be the CEO.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sure.
Just going back to paragraph 36, the sort of preceding paragraph. When you left government in 2008,
Yes.
did you leave the chairpersonship of HFM? And then, yeah, that's the
When I left government, September 25, 2008, I left the chairperson of the PIC and remained as the chairperson of HFM, because those are two separate entities.
And how was that achieved? I mean, did the PIC, ask you to do that, or because you were a rep of the PIC on that board?
Obviously, yes. I didn't conduct a sit-in and said I'm not going anywhere. The PIC said continue for continuity, and that position was confirmed by other shareholders as they came on board later on. Because as we know, all companies have AGMs, and in all AGMs, directors are voted in or voted out. In later years, I think after 2009, when the other shareholders came on board, that position was confirmed, yeah. But at that point, it was the PIC that said I must stay.
Then in 2012, when you became chairperson of HGP, I think, who got you there? How did you get the position? Am I correct? 2012 HGP chairperson?
Yes. When it comes to that, quite clearly the company went about to look for appropriate directors. And already, as Mr. Mahlwele has indicated, that unlike, the urban legend of liquidation, that it was a shell, it had interests, HFM, in the going-ons of HFM, but also contracting the employees and the expertise to HGP, you know. And in that process was a seamless transition of directors, you know, who now had nothing to do sitting on HFM, moved into HGP. Yes.
So you were transferred together with the assets and all that?
I suppose I was an asset. In my previous life, I was called an asset.
Okay.
Mr. Moleketi, can I ask you, the position of Harith FM and Harith GP, are either of those companies subject to the provisions of the PFMA?
No, they are not, and they were clearly set up to ensure that that was the requirement. That was the requirement of the investors. It was not because there's something wrong with the PFMA. It works in the public sector. But the PFMA itself has a number of obligations. It can make processes take much longer. And in this game, if I may use the term, you need decisions. You need turnaround time to be much shorter. You know, it's not a criticism of the PFMA, but in the in the private sector, I don't think it's an instrument. It's a law that makes for efficient execution. So both of them were not subject to PFMA.
And this is part of the idea that the management company and the funds should not be subject to government control.
Absolutely, yes.
Just another question there is that one would presume that after you left government and you go to HFM, you did receive board fees there.
Oh,
is
yes,
that correct?
I mentioned it, yes. As soon as I resigned, well, I had no income. I received board fees from HFM, yes. Thanks for raising that. Thank you.
And just for clarity, if we go back to your paragraph 35, it's a question that you state there, by virtue of my chairmanship, Mr. Moleketi, chairmanship of the PIC, I was appointed as the PIC's nominees to the board,
Sure.
and in that capacity, chairman of HFM.
Yes.
In that capacity being the capacity of the chair of the PIC,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
When HFM was then moved to the HGP, by virtue of being the chair, when you left government, you remained the chair at the request of the PIC itself as chair of HFM, and then moved with the entity and the management into chairing the HGP.
Yes.
HGP.
Sure.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Right.
Yeah.
But the origin of it was by virtue of your position as Deputy Minister of Finance.
Quite correct.
Which then morphed
PIC.
into
Sure.
the executive positions
Sure.
when you were no longer.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You're at the bottom of page 9.
Given his expertise,
No, the next sentence.
the next sentence, Mr. Mashwele, which one? Several highly skilled employees necessary for the overall expertise of the fund were headhunted, were sourced from the PIC and the financial service industry at large. And those are the people that Mr. Mashwele was referring to in his evidence. It was these employees who were the beneficiaries of the Heritage Share Incentive Scheme Trust. I was not one of them. The purpose and objectives of HFM was solely the management of PAIDF1, and as such, it was precluded from establishing further funds. By August 2007, the sum of $630 million had been raised, and the PAIDF was then closed, that is PAIDF1. And the investors were, just for the record, GPF, that is the Government Employees Pension Fund, $250 million, ABSA Limited, $125 million, the Development Bank of Southern Africa, $100 million, the African Development Bank, AFDB, $50 million. Old Mutual Life Assurance, $50 million. Stanlip, $30 million. SNIT, which is a Ghanaian pension fund, $10 million. Momentum Metropolitan Holdings, $10 million. Eskom Pension and Provident Fund, $5 million. That made up the investors in Fund 1.
And to just repeat what we had discussed with Mr. Motloele when he was giving his evidence, of that 630 million, only 60 million came from non-South Africa.
Well, my calculation, let's see. I think you're correct. I think when you add the sums, yeah.
So it was in essence, given the idea that this would be an African fund drawing on pension funds as envisaged originally by the president, the then President Mbeki, in essence, out of the 630 million US dollars, only 60 million was able to be drawn in PAIDF 1.
In terms of numbers, you're correct, but may I add in my answer?
Sure.
Just continue.
Sure.
One of the most important things is that all the investors in this fund shared the vision of investing on the African continent. So it was a mandate. So they invested understanding, not because they were matching. There was no matching. It was that we have a belief and we share the common belief of investing, you know.
Yeah,
Be
I'm
it
not
Absa,
questioning
sure.
their motivation and their understanding or that
Yeah.
this was an Africa-wide fund.
Sure.
I'm just raising the question that it was intended to be drawn, that the other countries in Africa, other countries in Africa were intended to be part of this, but at that PIDF 1 level, you only were able to succeed in drawing in 2 non-South African countries, or one being the African Development Bank and 1 country.
Sure.
It's just for information that that's the
No,
correct
it's a correct observation. It's a correct observation.
Can I add a broad question which you may choose to answer, but it's quite broad? I mean, it's quite interesting that the continent says that, you know, we need to build roads and airports and all that. And when a fund is raised, they actually don't put in the money. So, I mean, why is that so? I mean, it's quite intriguing for me to talk about it. And, you know, when the vehicles are there, then they don't put in the money, the other countries.
Yeah, let me also answer it broadly. And in answering it broadly, so that on this one I stand on the side of the continent, because we are part of Africa. We are Africans. Dr. Kaberuka, who was the president of the African Development Bank, launched a fund which was called Africa 50 Fund. This fund, it had the same objectives. It was launched on the 23rd of May in Kigali. 23rd of May, I think it was 2004. Just hold on. I'll get exactly 2013. The fund was endorsed in 2013 by the African finance ministers during the bank's annual meeting. That is the bank's annual meeting, which is the African Development Bank in Marrakesh. I'm trying to indicate that the membership of that fund, as we speak, just the commitment of the continent, is made up of 25 member countries. They include countries like Benin, Burkina Faso, the Cameroon, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Malawi, Mali, Mauritania, Morocco, Niger. The list is long. So what I'm trying to say is that the continent has this commitment, and their shareholder meeting in July 2016. Just to cut a long story short, just to show that it was launched in July had the first meeting in July 2016, and the first investment of that company, of that fund, was a 400 megawatts solar plant in Benba, Egypt. And this was around October. The final close was in 2017, but the first investment was around, I think, around the same year. What I'm trying to indicate, sir, Commissioner, is that it's so important to understand that what Harith did also led to a number of initiatives in the continent, because they've seen the success, that the concept of an infrastructure fund in Africa was no longer something that could be dismissed as too risky. It can be done. We were the pioneers, and this fund was set up by Dr. Donald Kaberuka, following on the steps of Harith, which is a clear indication that gradually more and more African countries are investing their resources and savings in this infrastructure development endeavor.
Okay, thank you.
Paragraph 40.
The investors were not required immediately to pay over the full amount of their commitments. As was practiced in the industry, they undertook to make funds available as and when required by the fund manager, who drew down the funds in line with the demands of the relevant investments. Funds are not held idle in bank accounts to be drawn on as and when the fund manager pleases. The investors actively participate in the choice and nature of all investments through an investment committee, which allows them the ability to see through the fund structures. This meant that the investors were able at any time to scrutinize all the gains and losses made or incurred during the course of the investment cycles and all the amounts utilized for the purposes thereof.
In relation to that, perhaps you could explain page 93. What was the problem with regards to finalizing the arrangements with the investors about the shares from PIC to the different investors? That's the letter from Martin Couscous, page 93 to 95.
To myself, yes. Mr. Matwele walked on this path in his evidence. One of the things is that somehow there was a bit of what I will term as a difficulty that is slightly more than just an administrative difficulty for the PIC to execute on this mandate of ensuring that the mandate and the structure of the fund is as it was envisaged, as captured in the letter of Mr. Couscous. That's where the issues were. It took a lot of toing and froing, a lot of negotiations, but ultimately the matter was resolved, Commissioner.
Mr. Moleketi, can I just get some clarity on this? The letter at page that starts at 93 to 95 of Exhibit 3 is dealing with the issue that arose relating to the shareholding of investors in the management committee.
Sure.
I beg your pardon, in the management company, which is Harith FM.
Yeah.
At paragraph 41 of your statement, you're dealing with a body called the investment committee. Can you clarify how, if at all, the investment committee differs from the management company?
Okay, I can clarify that. The investment committee is made up of investors, primarily, and Mr. Martin Couscous, by virtue of being, at that point, being the chair of GPF trustees, was also the chair of that investment committee. It involved other stakeholders, I don't know, forgot their names, but they represented APSA, Old Mutual, they all sat around the table. Those are the people who took decisions around investment, that they took investment decisions.
So the investment committee is a committee of the PAIDF.
Yes.
It's not a committee of HFM.
No. It was a committee of PAIDF, yeah, sure. Now, I was referring to this letter. I think you are referring me to the letter. I must have lost track of that.
Yeah, I was referring to the letter because what you indicate in 4.1 and has just been elaborated is that the investment committee represented those shareholders who were also invested.
Yeah.
And given the dispute over the shareholding, did it impact at all on the role of the investment committee?
No, it didn't.
Yeah, so they continued with that, notwithstanding that there was a dispute
Sure.
for some period of time about
Yeah.
their actual transfer of shares.
Yeah. My recollection, it didn't. They continued, yeah. But they needed this matter to be finalized. And I think there was also, as Mr. Mashwele indicated, a threat of withdrawing the mandate from HFM.
It's a further question. The IC, the committee, the on HFM is the Stanleys and the Mutual. The committee in HGP, who are the people there in the IC? The investment committee. In the investment committee in HGP, PAIDF 2. Yes, who are the people in that committee there?
I don't have the names, and I know that I'm a member of that investment committee. It is chaired, our chairperson is Dolika, who is a lady, an investment
Mambula.
experience. Yeah.
I know her, yeah.
You know her?
Yeah.
You know. And who else sits in that investment committee? The names will come.
So it's quite different
It's
now
different.
to the
General
Stanleys
partners,
and the
absolutely,
old
the
Mutual and the
limited.
Absas.
Yeah, sure, it's different.
But it's got the people who are not only part of the PIC and sort of HGP people.
Yeah.
It doesn't have it's got other people who are non-PIC, non-HGP. Is that correct? The investment committee of PAIDF 2.
Yes. Because there are
PAIDF
people
2.
like Vincent and all that who are known exactly. It has other people who give
Can
the
we-
names. Yeah.
Yeah, is it possible to get a list of the people in the IC of PAIDF 2, please?
Yes, Commissioner, I'm sure that is.
Okay.
And in fact, we can do the same for PAIDF 1.
Yeah. And by the way, last week we asked for documents on the fees and the financial statements. I wonder, when are we going to get those? I thought you guys would have brought them today,
I'll take instructions during the tea break, and I'll be able to let you know where the documents
Okay, all right.
We have
Okay.
them. Apparently, we do have them.
You do have the docs. Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Now, where are we now? I must put a marker. Sorry about that. As at the 31st of 2018, the GPF's initial investment of 2.3 billion rands, which is some $248 million, out of the 250 million committed by the GPF, and forming part of the 630 million total investment in the fund, was independently valued and audited at $279.3 million, being some 3.3 billion rands. The gross IRR, as calculated by the fundis, and to such date is 6.2% in US dollars, and in terms of rands, it is 11.7 in rand terms. I think this matter was covered also in Mr. Mashwele's evidence.
Yeah, and just for emphasis, I think if it's a dollar investment, as we said then,
We must
should
just
be a
keep it a
dollar
dollar.
return, because otherwise your exchange rate
I know
translation
there is
effects
a-
are not...
The exchange rate
They
gains,
confuse
you
the
know?
issue. They will distort the issue. And just to be clear, as at 31st of March 2018, from inception, was that 2007 of the
Yeah,
fund?
yeah.
So 2007 to 2018.
Yeah, it was.
Okay, so that would be 11 years, and the return over that 11 years is $31 million US dollars.
According to this, yes.
Yes, thanks.
Sure. At least capital was not lost, but yes, that's the return. But, As I already mentioned, in September 2008, I resigned as the Deputy Minister of Finance and accordingly as the Chairman of the PIC. I'm making a correction because I think the Chairman of the Commission is correct there. However, at the request of the shareholder, not shareholders, of HFM, because at that point the shareholder was the PIC, who obviously had the necessary confidence in me, who were probably motivated by considerations of continuity and stability. I remained on as the chairman of HFM. From then onwards, received a modest emolument. It is modest indeed. I'm not like minimizing it, you know. Yeah, compared to what I received from other boards, sir, it is quite modest.
Chair, I think this would be an appropriate point because we're now moving on to HGP, a point to take the adjournment.
Yes, we'll adjourn until 11:45.
partners with the following investors. The Government Employees Pension Fund, 350 million. DTD, a consortium of high net worth individual, 35 million. AFDB, the African Development Bank, 25 million. DBSA, the Development Bank of Southern Africa, 15 million. Botswana Public Officers Pension Fund, 10 million. PAIDF 2 was finally closed to further funding contributions in June 2006, and the funds invested in similar projects as in the inaugural fund, that is PAIDF 1.
A question here?
Yes.
I understand that you are the chairperson of DBSA.
Yes.
And it invested in this fund in PAIDF 2.
Yes.
Were there any perceptions of conflicts or anything around this issue?
Thank you very much for raising that question, Commissioner. The DBSA, when it took these decisions, because I was not just the chairman of the DBSA, I was also a member of its Investment and Credit Committee, which is where such decisions are processed. In all areas where health is discussed, where this investment was discussed, I recused myself. Not only recused myself and stayed in the meeting, I left the room. But for that, I think your team can get the requisite documents from the DBSA. I no longer have access to those documents, as I indicated. I retired on the 31st of December, 2018. But I'm sure the team of the commission can have access to that to basically get to that, because it's minuted in every aspect where these matters were discussed.
So you are quite happy that that conflict
There
was
is no
well
conflict.
managed?
It was managed.
Yeah.
It was managed quite well. We have a very, very good, not just a team of people that constituted that board, but also we had a very good company secretary. You know, when you have a good company secretary, that's the person who alerts you, to say that, on this agenda today we'll be discussing these matters. These are the people who have a potential conflict, And that was managed quite effectively. There was no instance where there was a conflict.
Just as a broader question, does the DBSA invest money on the continent? Because it looks like the model of PAIDF 2 is the same as what the DBSA does generally here.
Not
just if you could just explain those different.
Not quite. In the continent, basically the DBSA funds to a large extent. It deals with debt funding. Not equity.
Oh, yes,
yeah. That's how it is. That's why I'm saying it's not exactly the same. There isn't anywhere where, to a large extent, there could be a bit of an overlap. In fact, there are instances where in some of the projects on the continent, the DBSA extends a debt facility where you'll find that PAIDF is an investor, So those are some of the advantages. I think I've always seen it as an advantage, having a PAIDF type of an investor and a DBSA in the same continent, because they're all South African, primarily South African-based companies. That increases not only their opportunities, but also the issues of business intelligence in areas where they work.
So there are places where DBSA has put in debt in a transaction and PAIDF has put in the equity portion. Are there some projects and contracts?
There could be. I know that there was a time when Lake Turkana also featured in the DBSA's radar, but we'll have to check that. But there was no, Chinese wall that prevented the DBSA from doing that.
Chairperson, I'm sure you declared the interest whenever
absolutely
those kind of things came up and all that.
Exactly, sure.
Okay, all right.
I think you're at 53.
53. At March 2018, the GPF's initial investment commitment in the sum of 300, I think I've dealt with that one, haven't I?
No, you haven't.
I haven't, oh. of the GPF's initial investment commitment in the sum of 350 million of the overall investment value of the fund of 435 million had been drawn down to an extent of some 87.5 million. That is as of March 2018. The value of that investment was independently valued at $102.6 million, equating to some 1.2 billion rands. I know that this irritates Commissioner Marcus, but I'm sticking to my statement, Commissioner, no offense, man. Between March 2018 to February 2019, the sum invested by the GPF then increased to almost 182 million US dollars. The gross internal rate of return and to March 2018 was to the tune of 44.4 US dollars in terms of US dollars and 40% in terms of rands. The same principle of scrutiny, accountability, and transparency applied in regard to PAIDF 2. Insofar as Libashare is concerned, in respect of which my colleague...
Move on to Libashare. Just to stay with those numbers for a minute, if I understand this correctly, from inception in 2012, would that have been?
Yeah.
To 2018, if you go from 87.5 million US to 102.6, it's roughly $15 million that was earned by the GPF over that period.
The fund closed, if I'm not wrong, in 2016. June 2016.
Okay, but your numbers here indicate the total value of that investment was independently valued at 102.6 million.
Yes, March
right?
2018.
So
yes.
from $87 million to 102 million is roughly $15 million that was earned in that period.
Yeah, sure.
Okay?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Can I just ask, in relation to that, because there seem to be some speaking past one another. When is the 87, if you know, when is the $87.5 million drawn down? Is it drawn down in 2012 when the fund is established, or is it drawn down in 2016 when the fund is closed?
Normally, the drawing down, as the statement said, it's when the investment opportunity occurs. The exact date I'll have to defer to Mr. Mashwele. I wouldn't know exactly when the exact date is.
So would it be sometime between 2012 and 2016?
I would hazard a guess that it could be probably around 2016, but I think we'll verify that.
Thank you.
I think it's just really indicative that from the time of inception, obviously the drawdown occurs with the investment, and therefore it may not be 2012, it may be anything up to 2016, but in the period of time that the fund was drawn down, till 2018, $15 million was earned.
Sure. Yeah.
Just to check, Fund 2, is it from 2012 to 2024, isn't it? Is it a 12-year fund?
The 12-year, yes.
Fund, PIDF 2.
PIDF
Is that
2.
from 2012 to 2024?
When do we count? We count from 16 or 12. Because the close was in 2016.
Oh, yeah, okay, all right.
You know?
But it's a 12-year fund.
The setting up of the company was 2012.
Okay.
You know? So I think the key thing is to count from the close of the fund, which is 2016.
Okay, but it's a 12-year fund.
It's a 12-year fund, if I may recall.
All right.
Yeah. Insofar as Libashare is concerned, in respect of which Mr. Whitley will give more detailed evidence, I was involved with him, that is Mr. Warren Whitley and Mr. Tsepo Mashwele, in its establishment. It is a private management and advisory company in which I, through the Mbenzane Family Trust, have an interest. This is a matter of public record. So is the fact that I was appointed as a non-executive director of the board, to the board of Libashare in January 2017. I am remunerated accordingly. The establishment of Libashare, or Libashare, or whatever the pronunciation, Mr. Mahlwele explained what lies behind the name, occurred 8 years after I resigned as a Deputy Minister of Finance. My involvement in Libashare has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with my earlier positions in government or in either of the Harith entities. This was a private venture and it's a private matter. Having set out in detail my affiliation with HFM, HGP, and Libashare, I tend to focus to some of the specific allegations made by Mr. Olomisa in his evidence.
Just another question
Yes.
before you go forward. You mentioned that HGP
Yeah.
was formed as a multi-fund company.
Yes.
All right?
Yeah.
So when you buy funds in Mauritius and Nigeria, whatever, where do you put them? Do you put them under Libashare or under HGP?
Libashare. There is no relationship between Libashare and Harith General Partners. Those two entities, the only thing that creates a relationship, which I think is something that I must deal with, is that both Mr. Mahlwele and I are directors in both companies, right? That's one, and Mr. Mahlwele is the chairman of Libashare. The second area that I think also creates this confusion is the fact that we are located in the same office park. That is for efficiency purposes, you know? Those are the only two relationships. When you talk about issues around the entities are separate, there is no cross-pollination in terms of funds, acquisitions and all that. Both of them are two separate entities.
But the question is, these new funds which are being bought, I don't know, are they within Libashare or in HGP?
Which funds are those?
Mauritius, I think.
Which funds are those? And
I don't know whether.
what I know is that Harith had offices in Mauritius, you know, to manage a number of other activities, partnerships with different partners on the continent, you know. And we had an executive, Lisiba, who was tasked with the management of those relationships. It had nothing to do with Libashare. Those were Harith's activities, establishing relationships with different partners. And I think those are some of the investments and partnerships that Mr. Mahlwele referred to in his evidence. It's a partnership with an entity in Nigeria. That is Harith. It has nothing to do with Libashare.
All right. To be clear, so the HGP is a multi-fund company.
Yes.
Are there any companies that HGP has bought in the past while?
Besides the partnership,
Or is just the JVs and the partnerships which
Yeah.
you are talking about?
currently, what I know is I speak under correction, is the partnerships and the JVs.
Yeah. All right. Okay.
Now I'm on 58.
Now, when you refer to the transcript, page 16 of 29,
Yeah.
you're in fact referring to what is now Exhibit 2,
2, yes.
and it's page 34.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. I've dealt with my relationships with the relevant companies. I've also explained how the seed funding from the PIC came about. I deny that Mr. Mahluele's employment with the PIC coincided with his duties at the PIDF. Accordingly, there can be no allegation of a conflict of interest. I deny and take exception to the description of being a PIC operative that Mr. Holomisa has assigned to me and the others. Operatives are normally description being sent to intelligence operatives or special forces operatives, not business persons of good standing like ourselves, you know. So we take serious offense to that. And I also deny the unfounded allegations that I sought to create an empire on the back of PIC funds. All of these allegations are extremely helpful and damaging to me. I don't mean to sound arrogant, but I believe I'm a respected former deputy minister, having served my party and my country, and I'm now a businessman, using my acquired skills and talents to the best of my ability, as I am fairly and constitutionally entitled to do. Mr. Holomisa's unrelenting slander in this regard will be thoroughly dealt with in the actions for defamation already instituted pursuant to the urgent application.
Now, when you get to page 18 of 29, that is Exhibit 2, page 36.
Sure. It is hard to divine the importance of the link sought to be drawn by Mr. Holomisa regarding the business address of HGP and Libashe. As I indicated earlier, HFM, Harith Fund Managers, remains in existence, but is now essentially a passive fund generating entity. All three companies are entirely separate entities. Libashe rents from HGP in an arm's length transaction. These entities share premises for the sake of operational convenience. There is nothing untoward about this arrangement. All my interests have been disclosed to each and every board of directors of the companies which I serve. Now, moving to the next
Page
transcript.
20 of 29 is Exhibit 2, page 38.
I repeat that there was never a conflict of interest in existence when I was a Deputy Minister of Finance or at any time thereafter. I only received remuneration from HFM after I ceased being the Deputy Minister of Finance. In conclusion, the allegations that Mr. Holomisa has made against me are indeed unfounded. They have no basis on facts. They are spurious, damaging, and self-serving. I ask that they be treated with a great circumspection by the Commission. And I freely avail, Chairperson, myself further, if needs be, to assist the work of the Commission at any time. Commissioner Chair, thank you very much, but my son said I must quote this aspect, you know. I have two sons, Temba. He sent me this, and I would like to end my statement with that. It's a quote from St. Augustine. St. Augustine says, I quote, "The truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Let it loose. It will defend itself, close quote. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner.
Yeah, I've got just one or two questions.
Can you just hang on, Advocate Libbe?
Just two more questions before you go from our side. I think, we have tried to canvass the facts over the many days, and perceptions are another thing, which is quite a hard thing to deal with. I mean, broadly, perceptions have been that, GPF has been giving you guys money, $600 million, that the PIC has funded you, seeded you with money, and they finance your Capitec shares to the tune of what? Billions of rands. And, people say you were the deputy finance minister, you were in the PIC chairperson, Mr. Matloele has been in the PIC also. Just people think this is just a schoolboy club, that is just getting money from the PIC. Do you want to make a comment about that? About these perceptions?
Yes.
Even given the fact that we have been canvassing a lot of facts around this issue.
Sure. Thank you very much, Commissioner, for that question. I think, through you, Chairman, I hope this commission will go a long way of providing facts and making people stop believing in this era of fake news, of anything that they read on social media, And I think that, to us, and hence we came voluntarily, it is an opportunity for ourselves to tell our story and to tell what the truth is. I think that's one thing that I would like to say, and I value and I'm grateful of being given this opportunity. The second matter is that being the Deputy Minister of Finance, when I resigned on the 25th of September 2008, everything stops immediately, in government, There isn't this thing that, you have, you put in when you're a public office bearer, a resignation and you have a month's notice. No. Remuneration stops on that day. And there isn't in existence anything that stops or precludes a public office bearer from engaging in activities that enhances, when I talk about activity, I'm talking about legal, entrepreneurial activities that enhances their well-being or their income or their family wealth. There isn't. There is nothing that is called garden leave. There are no constraints of trade. There is nothing like that. So from the 25th of September 2008, I was free to engage in any entrepreneurial activity. And I think that's one of the things that ought to be stated quite clearly, The fact that because I was a deputy finance minister, I was associated with the PIC. I think to establish the facts is to look at what is it, what sort of transactions. I'll talk about leadership, because that's a private one, which came 8 years later. What sort of transaction were we engaged in? Mr. Matloele went into the details. That did not follow the rigor and the required process within the PIC. This thing of being the favored boys, when the PIC in that fund, that unlisted fund, is having more than 100 other, So there are 100 favored boys, I suppose, so that we don't reduce to 3, So it means, if that is the perception, there are many other individuals and companies that have benefited from the PIC. To be isolated, I think, is basically for other ulterior motives. For us to be perceived as people who are always favored, as operatives, I think it's basically to drive a perception against ourselves, against our interests, and also to undermine our own integrity. No such things have happened. We are here. Mr. Whitley will come and clearly explain the processes that we followed in acquiring that. Over and above that, of all our other funding and transaction, we are not only funded in Libashe by the PIC. Mr. Mashwele explained there are other commercial banks that are involved, you know. Mr. Whitley will explain the other commercial banks that are involved. In all our other transactions, it is only the Capitec transaction of the many that we're involved in that was funded by the PIC. So if everyone says whatever we do, we get funded by the PIC, that is false and it's untrue. The third element, we value our partnership with the PIC. I want to put that on record. Because through the PIC, not just ourselves, but a number of other entrepreneurs were able to realize their dreams of being entrepreneurial, of building wealth, and increasing the participation of Africans and black people of this country in the economic life of this country. And I think the role that the PIC has played can be minimized. It has played a significant role. I know a number of black asset managers who are who they are today because of the role and the investment and the confidence that the PIC had in them. We are one of those, and we appreciate that. We are one of many good examples of PIC's investment activities. And I think it's important to underline those facts. And lastly, nothing untowards. We are not favored. We went through the same rigor like everyone else. Over and above that, as Mr. Mashwele has indicated, the PIC has benefited handsomely from our transactions. I think the figure of 1.7 billion profit was mentioned the other day. And I'm saying that in itself, ourselves have also generated a lot of revenue for the PIC. So it was a mutually beneficial association between ourselves and the PIC, talking as an investor and a director in Libashe.
Thanks. My second question, it's a broad but difficult question, and I hope Mr. Beggar doesn't shoot me down. Do you, as former chair of the PIC, do you think that trade unions should have members on the board of the PIC?
You know.
Okay, he's quiet. So.
No.
Look, it's a difficult question, and it's in our terms of reference. So I thought, let me take advantage.
You are really putting me on the air.
Yes,
in my political life, when I was a member of the NEC of the ANC, I advanced position that did not make me the most favored person amongst my comrades in the unions. But in this one, I would say, you know, when you look at the trustees of the GPF, they are made up, the unions have a seat as the trustees of the GPF, the true custodian of the pensions of the workers. That's the GPF, you know? And I think it will be very difficult for the unions to manage a conflict of sitting on two sides of the table. I hope that is thought through carefully. Because you hold the PIC on a mandate that you give to the PIC. And if your fellows are also in there, you know, doesn't that begin to undermine your capacity to exercise your option as the custodian? That, I think, is a question that I'll put. I think it will be quite,
So it's basically the agent and principal conundrum, in a sense. Absolutely. That how do you hold the PIC accountable if you are part of the investments decisions on the board of the PIC? Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly, we've put it more eloquently, Commissioner. That's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah.
All right. All right. Thank you very much. It's not my position. We're still investigating. I'm just trying to explain it. Yeah.
I've given my views.
Yeah.
I hope when I walk out here, I'll still have more friends than I have now.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Just before Advocate Leber asks you questions, I just want to say that to my mind, the reason why you are being singled out is precisely because you were at the PIC as chair and at the same time chair of HFM, which was set up, and then you moved to HFM and other established management companies thereafter. I think that is the question that people are asking. How did this happen? Was it somebody cooked up whilst they were at the PIC, and so on? I think that is why it appears that you are being singled out, despite there being other people or institutions that benefited from the PIC. That's what I think the position is.
No, Commissioner, if the intention was to explore that, there are a number of avenues that could have been established, particularly with the Commission, to say to the Commission, I have these questions. Can we investigate whether there was something untoward in terms of this transition? I don't think I warrant to be called a hyena in the public media, as Mr. Holomisa has done, you know. And I think that's where the big issues are. That the question should be raised if people feel that there might be something. I have no question with that, I accept it, you know. But it's how you do it and all the other adjectives you attach to raising those questions. It is on the basis of that I believe the motive was not a genuine motive because it was not accompanied with facts. It was just slander and insults.
That's fine, I understand that. I deliberately kept out reference to the kind of animal that you mentioned just now.
It's just to follow up, it's quite intriguing. Do you think that General Bantu Holomisa has got any motives other than to say, I wanted the commission to look at that? Do you think there's anything personal maybe, or he was just trying to assist the commission, or do you think there's something that is got against you maybe, or the company, or Mr. Mahloele and all that, broadly?
I would answer it that there is an undeclared motive. It's true. What it is, I can't speculate. Because anyone who genuinely seeks to find the truth, you don't go to the media, insult people, paint them in a particular light, and then come to the commission and pretend that you are genuinely seeking the truth. I find that a little devious, very difficult to accept its nature that it's genuine and its intentions are pure. So I would say there is a motive, and it is not a motive that is kind to my name, the name of my colleagues, Tsepo and Warren Whitley, because it has harmed our good name. So the intention was to harm our good name. What the exact motive is, I can speculate, but the intention has been served by that.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Right, yes, Mr. Leber.
Thank you. Mr. Commissioner, Mr. Moleketi, I'll be brief in my cross-examination, and I will stick to the terms of reference of this commission, and I refer particularly to 1.3 of the terms of reference, which reads that whether any PIC director or employee used his or her position or privileges or confidential information for personal gain or to improperly benefit another person.
Sure.
I'm going to stick to that.
Sure.
I've listened with great interest to your opening statement about the first 10, 12 years of the new democracy and people like Alec Irwin and Trevor Manuel, on the face of it, perhaps inexperienced people leading government. I must perhaps just mention to you, it's not peculiar to South Africa, it's an international problem. I've learned this morning over the radio that a comedian has been elected as the president of the Ukraine. So I think what we need from politicians is not so much experience in what they're doing, but honesty and integrity and supporting the values we all stand for. Isn't that what we're really looking at?
Absolutely, and the leadership qualities that they come.
Exactly. Now, let me start with what I could term objective facts. That's not in dispute, and what you testified about. And that is, first of all, it is common cause that the PIC engaged the GPF with this proposal to go out to Africa and to implement the NEPAD dream of former President Mbeki. And it seems to me that it's also a fact that the reason for that was because it was not in the mandate of the PIC to go outside South Africa with investments. Would you agree?
Yeah. At that point, yes.
Yes.
It wasn't, sure.
And in anticipating the go-ahead from the GPF, if I may call it so, an advance party was sent out by the name of Tsepu Mohlese to establish this vehicle and to realize the dream of investing in Africa. Would you go along with that?
When you mean, can you explain that advance vehicle so that at least I know that?
Somebody was elected or selected by the PIC
Okay.
to go into the private sector and to establish this vehicle.
The viability of such an idea.
Yes.
Sure. Okay.
And this was done, as one of the commissioners mentioned, without following a process, finding out, is this the best person to go out to do the job? Do you agree with that?
Chair, I'm not sure that that's been established. I asked Mr. Moleketi specifically whether he was aware of the process that was followed and whether he was party to that, and he said no. But we don't know what process, if any, was followed by the PIC in identifying Mr. Mahlwele. And that would be for the PIC to say.
I perhaps must put it more clearly. On the evidence of Mr. Mohlele and yourself, it would seem that he was just selected to go out without any process being followed. And we'll ask Mr. Mohlele when he comes back, and we'll ask the PIC when they come here. But as far as you're concerned, you were not part of the process.
No.
Who was the CIO at the time at the PIC?
The CIO, if I recall, it could have been Dr. Dan Majila.
And he would have been part of the executive.
He was the he was
No,
in the executive.
we'll ask him, we will come to the commission and we'll ask him about that. Now, we all know that this vehicle then was established by Mr. Mohlele. And in the beginning, he bought a shelf company and he held the 100% shares in that shelf company before it was transferred to the PIC. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And it is also clear from the evidence of Mr. Mohlele and yourself that the GPF then invested $250 million in PAIDF 1 to a fund manager who was a start-up fund manager in the market with no proven track record. Would you go along with that?
You know, in my opening remarks, I thought I was addressing that aspect because it's about that it was a new fund, it's true. But it is not entirely true that people who were leading the fund had no track record to talk about. They might not have had a track record in private equity or in fund management.
I'm not questioning the members or the people involved. I'm saying the fund itself had no proven track record.
It was the first fund, yes.
Yes.
It was the first fund, yeah.
And the GPF invested $250 million in PIDF.
Sure.
Would you agree that the only reason they did that, and we'll ask them when they come here, I'm just asking your perception of that, it's only because of the relationship with PIC and perhaps the trust they had with PIC that they went this route?
I won't answer on their behalf, sir, Advocate Leb. I won't answer on their behalf.
All right.
But what I know of all the investors is that they invested because they supported, first and foremost, the concept of investing on the African continent, investing in infrastructure, and also they were quite comfortable with the returns that were part and parcel of the agreement with the fund.
Did the PIC and the GEPF involvement in that fund, do you think it played a role?
Yeah?
The involvement of GPF and the PIC, did that play a role?
In
Did
what?
the other investors coming to invest? ABSA, Old Mutual, and those people?
I won't speak on their behalf. I think it will be important probably to establish that independently of the investment, to say exactly what persuaded you as ABSA to invest $125 million US.
All right.
Sure.
We also know that the original idea was that the PAIDF and the Harith management people will be totally independent from the public sector. Is that correct? That was the idea.
It should be run like a private.
And the PMFA and those other statutes must not be applicable.
Sure.
Right. Now we have the situation developing that after the 100% shares were transferred to the PIC, suddenly, and we don't know the reason, we'll have to ask them, but suddenly, but you were still there, perhaps you can tell us, there's this reluctance to transfer shares to the other investors who, according to Mr. Mashlele, were promised that they will get shares so that it will enable them to appoint directors on the board and to take part in the management of this fund.
I would say it was a difficult process, but I would like to speculate. The PIC hopefully will be here. They can answer fully what was the tussle around implementing that.
Was it not discussed at board level?
The what?
The non-transfer of shares to the other investors?
No, I don't recall it getting up to the board level.
But you were still at that time the chair of the board?
I was the chair of the board up until the
2008.
25th of September 2008. If
Yes.
it was before then, I was still the chair. Sure.
Yes. And you cannot recall it was
I
discussed at board level?
I don't recall it being discussed at the board level.
Right. Then for some other reason, the PIC gives in, and it then transfers shares to the other investors like ABSA and Old Mutual. They get 12%. And then for some other reason, the PIC decides, notwithstanding the agreement with Harith and the GPF, we're going to keep 46%.
That, one of the things that Mr. Mashlele in his evidence led is that there could have been another shareholder, which is the AFDB. But because of certain immunities that the AFDB required, they pulled back. And ultimately, because there was a shareholding, a percentage remaining, the PIC grabbed it.
What I also don't understand, and it's a fact, that you who testified to that, Mr. Mohlele testified to that, the PIC had absolutely no exposure to risk.
Sure.
They had no role to play. They invested nothing except for the seed money they paid and that got repaid with interest.
Sure.
But now they sit with 46% of the shares, and they share in the wealth of this new fund manager. Why?
Yeah. I would say it's a recognition of the role. I want to address the scale, but it's a recognition of the role that the PIC played as the initiator. Secondly, there is always a goodwill element. And hence, I suppose.
The answer, the question, the further question is, if that is the answer, isn't the true party that you chair, the GEPF, they invested the money, the bulk of it. And I must just make a correction, Mr. Commissioner. I handed up a legal opinion last week, and I stated on the document it appears to be April 2019. It's not correct. I also learned a lesson. It was on the website of some other organization. If you pull it down from the web, it gives the date you pull it down. The date of that opinion is 2009. So,
Yeah.
Chair, I'm sorry to interrupt my learned friend, but I don't understand the basis of this cross-examination. There's a document in the bundle, starting at page 96, which is a letter to the Minister of Finance recommending that the PIC remain with 40% of the shares in the management company, dated the 26th of May 2009, long after Mr. Moleketi had left government. And the recommendation is accepted by the Minister of Finance, Mr. Pravin Gordhan, that the PIC will remain with 40% of the shares in HGP. In HFM, I beg your pardon. There was then, as Mr. Mohlele testified, some back and forth about the further 6%, and the PIC remained with 46% of the shares. But as to 40% of the 46%, there's a government decision that should be the case. I'm not sure how, on what basis Mr. Libbe is suggesting that the GEPF should be entitled to or should have been entitled to the shares in the place of the PIC. Why Mr. Moleketi should be quizzed on that. And in any event, if this is something that arose in 2009, one would think that litigation in that regard has long since passed its sell-by date. I'm not quite sure what the point of this aspect of the cross-examination is and how Mr. Moleketi can help.
Yes, Mr. Libbe.
I'm just asking the witness, Mr. Commissioner, to testify and to provide an answer to facts that are not in dispute. We have the situation that it is common cause that the whole idea of this fund, establishment of the fund, to be outside of government. Then we have a turnaround by the PIC, and the legal opinion I handed up was to say that the GEPF challenged that position. My question is, and I think I lost the track of it now, why, oh, that is it, why, and notwithstanding that the opinion is dated 2009, why must the PIC benefit from the investment by the GEPF? The question, shouldn't it be the GEPF that should benefit as the main investor?
Yes.
Well,
Okay. I think if Mr. Moleketi is able to answer that question, you can go ahead and answer it. Or if you don't know,
I was about to say, I don't have an answer for that question. The only answer is stated in our...
But for the moment, forgetting about your previous political cap and putting on your expert investment cap now, if you look at these facts objectively, do you think it's fair? Is it correct?
I think that's a matter that, if it arises, that is, if it's arising so sharply that the PIC and the GPF have to resolve, and I have no further comment on that.
The last question I want to ask you, and it's really not have anything to do with the terms of reference, but it might assist the Commission on some of their recommendations. You testified that at the moment of you getting out of your position as Deputy Minister of Finance, you could immediately explore as an entrepreneur other opportunities. My question is, don't you think it would be a good thing, ethically, for people in high political positions to have a cooling off period before entering the private sector? And I just have your view on that.
It's an idea that could be explored, but as we all know, garden leaves and restraints of trade are paid for. It will mean whether or not the taxpayer is prepared to remunerate at the same level someone who was in public office who leaves for a particular period, paying the pensions and everything that goes with it to ensure that they don't engage in any activity. There's a cost to it, but I'm saying it's something that I'm sure, if it's explored, it's something that can be examined. I want to emphasize restraints of trade, garden leaves are paid for.
The last question is, it would appear from Mr. Moslele's evidence and your own evidence that after PAIDF and the starting of PAIDF 2, there was not really any appetite from the private sector in South Africa and very little appetite from outside South Africa. Is that correct or not correct?
Mr. Moslele, in saying that, went further to explain that a number of our initial partners had constraints because of Basel requirements, particularly the financial institutions. That also, financial sector, that also goes to insurance companies and all that, that limited their ability to continue to participate in such investment vehicles. And I think that's quite important, so that there is an objective reason that precludes some of these initial partners to participate in these ventures.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Any re-examination?
I have no further questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mleketi. Thank you for your time and your evidence that you have placed before us. It certainly cleared up certain of the factors that were raised or issues that were raised before us. And I think in your statement you have said at the end that you remain available. Absolutely. Should you be required. Mm-hmm. We'll remember that. Sure. And maybe you will be called back in due course. Okay. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, Commissioners. Thank you.
You're excused for now.
Thank you.
Mr. Commissioner, will it be convenient to take the lunch adjournment now till 2:45?
Yes, that's fine. We'll then adjourn until 2:45.